of looking into my husband's eyes and hoping he doesn't see the guilt sitting heavy on my shoulders, of watching my stepson, the way he sometimes looks at me like we're both in on some terrible, beautiful secret neither of us dares to say out loud. And yet, sometimes, I wonder if I'd still say it. If I'd still say yes. Because the truth is, that night, it wasn't about lust. It wasn't even about love. It was about being seen, being wanted, even if only for a moment. When you've been invisible for so long, when your marriage becomes this dull, cold routine, sometimes a little attention can feel like sunlight after living in shadows. I didn't go looking for any of this. I was just trying to be a good stepmom. Trying to hold a broken family together. Trying to be patient with a man who couldn't touch me without checking his phone right after. Trying to love a boy who'd lost his mother too soon and didn't know where he fit in anymore. But then, something shifted. It was subtle. A glance too long. A touch that lingered. A birthday wish whispered in the dim light of our kitchen, and a silence that felt like the air itself was holding its breath. And me? I broke that silence. With a word I can't take back. I've gone over it in my head 1,000 times. Maybe if I'd pulled away faster. Maybe if I hadn't smiled at his sketch. Maybe if I'd shut that door instead of standing there, heart pounding, wondering what it meant that I wasn't afraid. But life doesn't give you warning signs. Just quiet little forks in the road that you don't even realize matter until you're too far down to turn back. Now, every sound in this house feels heavier. Every smile feels borrowed. And some nights, when I pass by his room and see the light under the door, I wonder if he's awake. If he's thinking about me too. And that thought terrifies me and comforts me all at once. So if you've ever found yourself standing in a moment that felt both wrong and right, if you've ever said yes to something that your soul screamed no to, but your heart whispered, please, then maybe you'll understand what I'm about to share. Because this isn't just a story. It's a confession, a question, a wound, and maybe a warning. Subscribe to Heartfelt Tales Unfold to hear stories that live in the quiet spaces between right and wrong. The ones we don't dare say out loud, but never stop feeling. You ready? Because this is where it all begins. With a wish. And a yes. It started long before that night. Long before the yes. If I'm being honest, it started in the silence. We live in a quiet neighborhood. Tree-lined streets, the kind of place where everyone waves, but no one really talks. Our house looks like something out of a magazine. White siding, big front porch, flower boxes I plant every spring. From the outside, it's warm. Welcoming, put together. But on the inside, it's cold. Not in the temperature kind of way. Just empty. Still, I'm 36. Married for almost 9 years. My husband, Mark, is reliable, predictable, the kind of man who provides but doesn't participate. He gets up at 5. He checks emails before coffee. He eats dinner with his phone in one hand and barely looks up when I speak. We used to talk. Used to touch. Now, even our arguments feel rehearsed, like we're reading from the same tired script, just waiting for the credits to roll. I used to beg for connection. Therapy sessions. Weekend getaways. I even bought new lingerie once, thinking maybe I could wake him up with lace and soft music. He barely noticed. Said he was tired. That was the moment I stopped trying to be noticed and started learning how to live in the quiet. And then there's Eli, Mark's son, my stepson. He was 12 when I came into his life. His mother had passed from a long illness a year before. The kind of grief that doesn't explode, but sinks slowly, quietly, until it swallows you whole. He was so small then. So guarded. Didn't speak much. Barely ate. He'd sit by the window for hours, sketching with a pencil so soft I could barely see the lines. I didn't try to be his mom. I just showed up. Every morning. Every afternoon. I made his lunch. I learned the artists he liked. I hung his drawings on the fridge, even when they were just smudged lines and sad eyes. I was there. And over time, he let me in. He's 18 now. Still quiet. Still awkward. But there's a gentleness in him. A kind of emotional intelligence I don't see in most grown men. He notices things. Like how I like lemon in my tea. Or how I hum when I fold laundry. And lately, he's been noticing more. Looking longer. Speaking softer. There's this heaviness in his eyes, like he's carrying a question he's afraid to ask. And I felt it. That pull. That shift. Not romantic at first. Just human. It's strange how hunger doesn't always look like food. Sometimes it looks like a glance. A compliment. A soft thank you that means more than the words ever say. I remember one night, I'd made dinner, the usual. Mark was on a call, didn't even sit down. Eli stayed at the table with me. Just the two of us. We talked about music. About a painting he was working on. And out of nowhere, he said, "You always notice the little things." I laughed, a little surprised. He looked me in the eye and said, "That's rare, you know." I didn't know what to say. Because the way he said it, it wasn't just appreciation. It was loneliness. Maybe even longing. And something in me stirred. I should have brushed it off. But instead, I held his gaze a little longer than I should have. I smiled. And for the first time in what felt like years, I felt beautiful. Not because I'd done my makeup or wore something special. Just because someone actually saw me. It's a strange feeling, being seen when you've been invisible for so long. And maybe that's where the crack started. Not in the marriage. But in me. Mark didn't notice. Not when I stopped sitting beside him on the couch. Not when I started spending more time in the kitchen, even when I didn't have to cook. He just kept working. Clicking. Scrolling. Sleeping. And Eli. He kept showing up. With questions. With sketches. With that quiet, steady presence that felt more like comfort than it ever should have. Sometimes I'd catch him watching me. Not in a way that felt inappropriate. Just intense. Thoughtful. Like he was trying to memorize the details of my face. And then there were the things he'd say. Little things. Most people don't really listen. Sometimes I feel like I could disappear and no one would notice. "I think you're the only person who really sees me." I'd nod, offer reassurance. But deep down, I understood exactly what he meant. Because I felt the same way. Every single day. We were two people stuck in the same house, both starving for connection. Both pretending not to notice the growing space between us and the man we were supposed to rely on. I didn't see it as dangerous at first. I told myself it was just a bond. Something tender. Something healing. But looking back, I think part of me already knew that this closeness was a little too warm. That I was starting to rely on him in ways I never should have. That the line was starting to blur, and I wasn't trying hard enough to keep it sharp. And that's the thing about moments like this. They don't explode. They unfold. Quietly. Softly. Like pages turning in a book you didn't mean to finish. Until suddenly you're there. Staring at the last page. Wondering how the story ever got this far. It was a Wednesday. I remember because I always make pasta on Wednesdays. It's the one thing Mark eats without complaining, even if he barely says 2 words while doing it. That night, the house was unusually quiet, no calls buzzing from Mark's office, no news droning from the living room TV. Just the soft clatter of dishes and the simmering of sauce on the stove. I had my back to the kitchen door when I heard him, "Eli, can I talk to you for a second?" His voice was low, a little uncertain, like he wasn't sure if he should be asking. I turned and gave him a soft smile. "Of course." "Everything okay?" He didn't answer right away. Just stood there for a moment, shoulders tense, hands in the pockets of his hoodie. I needed to say something. His eyes flicked around the room, then landed on mine. "You're the only one who ever really notices me." I didn't know what to say to that. My heart squeezed in that way it does when someone says something that hits a little too close to home. I wiped my hands on a dish towel, leaned on the counter, and tried to keep my voice steady. "I see you, Eli. I always have." He nodded slowly. "I know. That's what scares me." I blinked. "Scares you?" He looked down, then back up, more vulnerable than I'd ever seen him. "My birthday's coming up," he said. I smiled, trying to lighten the mood. 18, huh? Big year. He didn't smile back. "I made a wish already," he said. "I know it's early, but I made one." I felt something in the air shift, like the room itself had paused. And? I asked gently. I don't know if I should tell you, he said. They say if you tell someone your wish, it won't come true. I waited, not pushing, just listening. He stared at me for a long time. Then he just said, thanks for the pasta, and turned and left the kitchen. I stood there for a while, watching the sauce bubble, pretending my hands weren't shaking. Later that night, I went upstairs to put away some laundry. Mark was in the bedroom, already asleep, one hand on his phone, even in his dreams. I walked down the hall to Eli's room. His door was slightly open, the light still on. I didn't knock. I didn't go in. I just stood there quiet. That's when I saw it. On his desk, half tucked under a book, was a drawing. A sketch. Of me. It wasn't a rushed doodle or some idle scribble. It was careful. Delicate. He'd drawn me the way I don't even see myself anymore. Soft eyes. A gentle smile. A light in my face I haven't seen in the mirror in years. It wasn't just a picture. It was a portrait. Drawn with such intention it almost broke something inside me. I stood there for what felt like forever, looking at it, looking at myself through his eyes. And in that moment, I knew. His wish wasn't about a party. It wasn't about gifts. It was about me. His wish was simple, but it would change everything. I couldn't sleep that night. I kept seeing the sketch every time I closed my eyes. Not just the lines of my face, but the way he'd drawn me, soft, open, like I mattered. Like he'd taken the time to memorize every part of me most people never even glance at. And it hit me. I hadn't felt seen like that in years. I laid there next to Mark, staring at the ceiling while he snored gently beside me. He didn't even notice I hadn't touched him in weeks. Didn't realize I'd stopped waiting for him to ask how my day was. Didn't notice how empty I'd become inside. It's strange. When someone stops loving you out loud, you start shrinking. Not all at once. Just slowly, quietly. Little pieces of you start to disappear, your laugh, your hope, your reflection in the mirror. But Eli. He saw something in me that I'd forgotten existed. Not just a stepmother. Not just someone who makes dinner and folds laundry and keeps the house running. He saw me. And I hated how good that felt. I hated how my heart fluttered when he said my name. How I'd started brushing my hair a little more carefully in the mornings. How I wore the softer sweaters, the ones that made me feel a little lighter, a little younger. I tried to rationalize it. He was just grateful. That's all. We had a bond, one that came from years of trying to rebuild something after everything he'd lost. Of course he felt close to me. I'd been there. I'd never let him fall. And I was just lonely. That's it. Loneliness does strange things to people. But then I started noticing little shifts. The way I'd linger a second longer in his doorway. The way I started choosing lip balm with a little tint to it. The way I'd feel a jolt of electricity when our hands brushed, even accidentally. I wasn't chasing anything. But I wasn't exactly running away either. And then came the guilt. Sharp. Sudden. It would creep in just as I started to enjoy those tiny stolen moments. The warmth of his voice, the way he watched me when I wasn't looking. I'd remember who I was supposed to be. A wife. A stepmother. A woman with responsibilities and boundaries and a marriage, no matter how broken it had become. But then I'd look at Mark, half there, half gone. And I'd think, does this even count anymore? We lived in the same house, but we hadn't touched in months. Not really. Not the kind of touch that lingers. Not the kind that makes you feel like you matter. We were partners in routine, not love. Strangers in matching pajamas. And meanwhile, Eli, he noticed everything. How I curled my fingers when I was nervous. How I hummed while I cooked. How I always sat facing the window, like I was waiting for something to arrive that never did. Every time he spoke to me, I felt like a woman again. Not a role. Not a responsibility. A woman. And it terrified me. Because I knew I was teetering on something dangerous. A thin line, barely there anymore. One more conversation, one more glance, and I wasn't sure I could pretend it wasn't happening. I kept telling myself, he's just a boy. He's just lonely. It's just admiration. Innocent. But that sketch, That sketch wasn't innocent. It was intimate. It was full of things he hadn't said out loud, but I could feel in my bones. And worse? I liked it. I wanted to be looked at like that. There were moments I'd catch myself watching the clock, hoping he'd come downstairs. Moments when the sound of his footsteps made my chest tighten in ways it never should have. Moments I'd go to bed wondering what would happen if I let this grow. I wasn't proud of it. God, I wasn't. But I was tired of starving. Of lying next to a man who didn't care if I disappeared. Of feeling like I only existed through chores and small talk and silence. I didn't want to cross a line. I just wanted to feel real again. But feelings don't stay small forever. You feed them with attention, with glances, with words not said aloud. And before you know it, they take root. I thought I could manage it. Stay in control. Keep things just barely close without tipping over. But something inside me had already started shifting. And deep down, I think I knew. I was already past the point of return. It didn't happen all at once. It was slow, like watching the sun move across the wall, only realizing the room is glowing when it's already bathed in light. Eli started talking to me more. Not the casual, surface-level conversations we used to have. No, these were deeper. Longer. Quiet. Late-night talks when the house was still, when Mark had already retreated to bed and the world felt softer, safer somehow. He'd linger in the kitchen after dinner. Help me dry the dishes even when I didn't ask. Ask about my favorite books, my favorite memories, things no one had bothered to ask in years. One night, he showed me a sketchbook he'd never shared with anyone. Page after page, drawings of dreams, of imagined places, of eyes that looked like mine. He told me he wanted to design cover art for books someday. Said he loved how stories could live on paper. I looked at him and said, "You're already telling stories. You just don't realize it." He smiled at me, slow and soft. Like he was hearing something he'd been waiting for. And that's when it started happening more. The small touches. A hand on my back as he passed behind me. A brush of his fingers when he handed me a plate. Nothing obvious. Nothing anyone else would notice. But I noticed. And one afternoon, early spring, the sun pouring in through the kitchen windows, I reached to grab a spoon from the counter. He reached at the same time. His hand landed on top of mine, and he didn't move it. Not right away. It was warm. Intentional. Too long to be an accident. And I didn't pull away. I felt the blood rush to my cheeks, to my throat. My heart did this quiet little stutter, like it wasn't sure how to keep up. I pulled my hand back eventually, made some excuse about needing to check the laundry. But I felt his eyes on me the whole time I walked away. And I hated how much I wanted to turn around. After that, I caught myself doing things I shouldn't have. Waiting to hear his footsteps down the stairs in the morning. Lingering by the door when he was in his room, wondering if he was thinking about me too. Checking my phone more often, just to see if he'd texted, even if it was something simple like, "Is there any more tea?" And when he didn't message, I felt disappointed, which only made me more ashamed. One evening, I was sitting on the porch reading. He came out quietly, sat beside me, closer than usual. We talked about books. Then music. Then somehow, the conversation shifted. He asked me if I believed in soulmates. I laughed softly and said I wasn't sure. That maybe I used to, before life got so real. He looked at me, eyes steady, thoughtful. "I think when two people see each other, really see each other, it's rare," he said. "Like lightning. Doesn't matter how wrong it is. It just is." I didn't answer. I couldn't. Because something about the way he said it, quiet, raw, certain, unraveled me a little more. I stood up, said I needed to start dinner. But that night, when I looked in the mirror, I saw something in my eyes I hadn't seen in years. Something alive. And then came the moment. The one I can't forget. I was in the living room, picking up stray throw pillows, lost in thought. He came in, no warning, and stood in the doorway. "Can I ask you something?" he said. I turned, nodded. He stepped closer. There was this quiet nervousness in him, like he was standing at the edge of something he couldn't undo. He looked right at me and said, "You're beautiful." Just like that. No joke. No smile to soften it. Just the truth, said out loud. I froze. I felt my breath catch in my throat, not because no one had ever said it before, but because it had been so long since someone had said it and meant it. I looked at him. At this boy, no, this young man, who had lost so much, who had found comfort in me, who now stood there, eyes searching mine, waiting for me to believe him. And I did. God help me, I believed him. I whispered thank you, turned away before he could see the tears starting to form. But that was the moment I knew something had shifted between us. Permanently. Not long after, he found me again. Another quiet night. The house dark, Mark asleep. I was standing in the kitchen, pouring a glass of water, when I heard him behind me. He didn't speak right away. Just stood there, waiting. And then, almost a whisper, I never told you my wish. I turned slowly. He was closer than I expected. He looked down, then back up. I wished, for one moment. Just one. Where I could be with someone who really knew me. Who really saw me. And still wanted to stay. My heart was pounding. So loud, I was sure he could hear it. He reached out, didn't touch me. Just hovered, like waiting for permission. And I didn't know whether to run. Or say yes. It was his birthday. 18. I woke up that morning with a knot in my stomach that wouldn't loosen. Mark had already left for work, like always. No note. No mention of Eli's day. Just the same cold silence in his wake. I stood in the kitchen, staring at the cake mix box on the counter. Chocolate, his favorite. I'd made it every year since he moved in. But this time, everything felt different. The air was heavier. My hands were slower. And I couldn't shake the feeling that something was coming. Something I couldn't stop. All day, Eli stayed quiet. Polite. Grateful. Distant, in that strange way people get when they're holding something heavy in their chest. We went through the motions. Dinner. Candles. Mark sent a half-hearted text. Tell him I said happy birthday. I didn't even show Eli. What was the point? After dinner, Mark claimed he had a late meeting. Said he'd be home around midnight. Didn't even look up from his laptop. I nodded. But inside, something in me was already unfolding. Some door, some boundary, slipping open. Quietly. Without resistance. When the house was finally still, Eli came downstairs. He was wearing a simple black sweater, sleeves pushed up. His hair slightly damp, like he'd just showered. He looked older that night. Not because of his age, because of the weight in his eyes. Can we have a private celebration? He asked softly. I hesitated. He smiled gently. Just cake. Just us. I nodded. Lit 2 candles in the middle of the kitchen table. Poured 2 glasses of sparkling cider. Dimmed the lights. Outside, the storm had started. Soft rain tapping against the windows, wind moving the trees in slow, sweeping motions. The air felt thick, like the whole world was holding its breath. We sat across from each other, barely speaking. Just sipping, smiling, waiting for something neither of us wanted to name first. Then he said it. My wish, he whispered. His fingers traced the rim of his glass, slow, deliberate. It's to be held by someone who truly cares. Just once. Just by you. I couldn't look at him at first. I stared at the flickering candles, watched the shadows dance across the tabletop. Every inch of my body was screaming with something I didn't understand. Fear, desire, guilt, longing. All of it, tangled into a silence too loud to ignore. When I finally met his eyes, I saw myself. Lonely. Empty. Yearning for something soft in a world that had grown sharp. He didn't reach for me. Didn't move. He just waited. And I broke. I stood up, walked around the table, paused behind him. I could have turned back. I could have said no. I could have run. But instead, I placed my hands on his shoulders. Felt the tension in him melt beneath my touch. Felt my own breath catch. He leaned back slightly, his head resting gently against my side. And I let myself hold him. Just hold him. But that moment, it was too much. Too intimate. Too close. Too quiet. It pulled something from both of us that had been buried deep. What happened next? I won't describe. Not because I want to hide it, but because some moments aren't meant for words. They're meant to be felt. The heat of skin against skin. The way two people can fall into each other without ever meaning to. How loneliness can look a lot like love when it's been starving long enough. It wasn't wild. It wasn't rushed. It was slow. Careful. Like two people afraid to wake up from a dream they shouldn't be having. Afterward, we didn't speak. Just breathed. Listened to the storm outside as it wrapped around the house like a secret. He touched my hand, gently. Whispered, "Thank you." And something in me shattered all over again. I went to bed with my heart pounding so loud I thought it might wake the walls. Mark was still gone. The bed was cold on his side. And for the first time in years, mine was warm. But I couldn't sleep. Not with the weight of what I'd done. Not with the memory of his hands, his voice, his wish. I told myself it was a one-time thing. Just one night. One moment. But hearts don't understand rules. They don't care about lines or titles or what you should feel. They just feel. And mine wasn't ready to let go. Subscribe to Heartfelt Tales Unfold so you don't miss what happened after. The next morning, everything felt wrong. The light coming through the curtains felt too bright. The silence in the house felt heavier than usual. And my skin, it still held the warmth of the night before, no matter how many times I washed it. I stayed in bed longer than I should have. Mark had come in late after midnight. I'd pretended to be asleep. He didn't kiss me. Didn't ask how the night went. Just climbed into bed and turned to face the wall. When I finally made it downstairs, Eli was already at the table, eating cereal. No eye contact. No good morning. Just silence and the sound of the spoon clinking against the bowl. I poured coffee with shaking hands. My stomach felt like it was lined with glass. I didn't know what to say to him. What could I say? Sorry I crossed every line? Sorry I let you touch parts of me that should have stayed untouched? Sorry that it meant something I can't even begin to name? But I said nothing, and neither did he. That day passed in a blur. He stayed in his room mostly. I found excuses to keep busy, laundry, vacuuming, cleaning drawers that didn't need cleaning. Anything to avoid the weight of what we'd done. But as the days went on, something started to shift. Subtle at first. Barely there. He would stand a little closer when we talked. Hold my gaze just a little longer than necessary. He'd brush my arm when he passed, just lightly, like reminding me he was still there. And I noticed it all. Every movement. Every glance. Every small invasion of space that felt both terrifying and electric. One afternoon, I was unloading groceries. He came up behind me, so close I could feel his breath on the back of my neck. He didn't say anything. Just reached past me to grab a can and held it for a moment too long before setting it down. It was possessive. Almost protective. Like he was marking territory no one else even knew had been crossed. I laughed it off, tried to act normal. But my hands were trembling when I put the milk in the fridge. And then came the day Mark came home early. It was unexpected. He said his meeting got canceled. Walked through the door around 3, briefcase in hand, surprised to find us both in the living room. I was sitting on the couch. Eli was on the floor, flipping through a sketchbook. When Mark stepped in, Eli's whole body stiffened. His expression changed. He stood up slowly, like he needed to put himself between me and his father. The way his eyes narrowed at Mark, it wasn't just distant. It was cold. Guarded. Like Mark was a threat, and I was something that needed protecting. Mark didn't seem to notice. He never noticed much. But I did. And it rattled me. That night, I found a note on my pillow. Folded neatly. No envelope. No name. Just one line. I meant it. The handwriting was unmistakable. So was the ache in my chest when I read it. The next day, I found a sketch slipped under the kitchen door. It was me again. Not smiling this time, just sitting by the window, hair falling into my face, eyes looking far away. At the bottom, he'd written, "Don't disappear." Every time I tried to breathe, something in me clenched tighter. I told myself I needed to set boundaries. That it had to stop. That it was a one-time thing. But Eli, he wasn't letting it fade. He was holding onto it like it meant everything. And maybe it did. Because the next time we were alone, barely a moment, barely a breath, he looked at me with that same steady gaze and said, "I'm in love with you." No hesitation. No doubt. Just the truth, laid bare like it was the most natural thing in the world. "I'm in love with you," he repeated. "And I want more." And in that moment, I realized this wasn't just a mistake anymore. It was a storm I couldn't outrun. I started writing again. Not stories. Not recipes. Just thoughts, quiet, disjointed, shameful thoughts I didn't dare say out loud. I pulled out an old journal from the bottom drawer of my nightstand. Covered in dust, barely held together by its worn leather spine. The first page was blank. The second, too. But by the third, the words started pouring out. Was I a monster? Or just someone who finally felt human again? I wrote that sentence over and over. Like if I saw it enough times, it might make sense. Might justify the heat I still felt on my skin whenever I remembered his breath on my neck. Might explain why a part of me still longed for that night, even while the rest of me drowned in guilt. I thought about telling Mark. I imagined the scene 100 times, me standing in the doorway, holding my sin and shaking hands like some broken object. But every version ended the same way. With Eli shattered. With Mark gone. With everything we'd built, no matter how flawed, reduced to ash. And maybe I deserved that. Maybe the truth should burn everything down. But I couldn't do it. Not yet. So I said nothing. And every morning, I put on the same mask. Same smile. Same silence. Then one morning, I came downstairs and found them laughing together. Mark and Eli. Sharing coffee. Joking about something on the news. For a moment, they looked like a family. Normal. Whole. Uncomplicated. I stood there, just outside the frame, unseen. And something inside me twisted. Not jealousy, exactly. Not regret. Just this hollow ache. Like I didn't belong anywhere anymore. Not with them. Not with myself. I thought about leaving. Packing a bag. Disappearing for a while. Starting over. But I kept thinking, if I left, would Eli hate me for it? Would he see it as abandonment? Would he chase after me? And worse, if he did, what would I do? The line between love and need had become so blurred, I didn't trust myself to know the difference anymore. One afternoon, when the house was quiet, I went to my closet. Pulled out the box I'd hidden in the back. Inside were the sketches. The notes. Little pieces of the secret we'd stitched together in the shadows. I took them outside, one by one, and laid them in the fire pit. Lit a match. Watched them curl into blackened memory. But one sketch, the first one he ever drew of me. I couldn't let it go completely. So I burned it last. And when the flames had finished their slow devouring, I reached into the ash with trembling fingers and scooped up what was left. Poured it into a small jar. Closed the lid. A reminder of who I became, and what I couldn't undo. That night, I wrote in my journal again. I thought I could end it. I thought if I just buried it deep enough, it would go away. But I was wrong. Some wishes never die. If you've ever found yourself standing right on the edge of a decision you can't take back. If you've ever felt torn between what's right and what your heart is screaming for, where love and guilt sit in the same room, both whispering in your ear, then maybe you understand. Maybe you've stood in a quiet kitchen too, heart pounding, hands shaking, knowing you're about to say something that will change everything. Maybe you've looked at someone who wasn't yours to love. And loved them anyway. So I'll ask you this. What would you have done? Would you have said no? Or would you have said yes? Because I did. And nothing was the same after. If this story stirred something in you, if you've lived through moments too complicated to explain, I want to hear from you. Tell me what you would have done. Tell me if I was wrong. Or if maybe, just maybe, some part of you would have done the same. Like, comment, and subscribe to Heartfelt Tales Unfold for more true stories that dig deep into the gray places of the heart, the ones most people are too afraid to tell. Because your voice matters. And we're listening. Some stories don't end. They echo. That night didn't fade like a bad memory. It clung to me quiet, tender, unbearable. It became my secret symphony of shame and tenderness. The moment I said yes, I lost something. Maybe it was innocence. Maybe it was who I used to be. But I also gained something. A glimpse. A realization. Of how much I'd been missing. Of how starving I'd become for softness. For being seen. For being wanted. But none of that makes it right. And that's the part that haunts me. Because emotional neglect isn't loud. It doesn't scream or hit or break dishes. It just forgets you exist. And when you go long enough without being touched, without being looked at like you matter, you start to reach for warmth wherever you can find it. Even if it burns. I should have set boundaries. I should have spoken up. I should have chosen silence over selfishness. But I didn't. I still live in this house. Still cook dinner. Still sleep beside a man who doesn't know what I've done. Eli? He still looks at me the same way. Only now, I can't look back. I don't know if I'll ever confess. I don't know if Eli will move on. Or if I'll ever forgive myself. Maybe the family stayed intact. Maybe we just became better actors. Maybe this is the cost of being human, of loving too deeply, too wrongly, too quietly. All I know is this: some wishes never die. And some stories never end.